Well, I don't think Ohio State's the best team, but here's why I would support them being number one. Because I do believe sometimes you have to create the inertia or the momentum to get coaches and ADs to schedule big games, right? And so they were willing to go to Notre Dame. That's not an easy game. And they played Penn State. Now, I didn't think they looked overwhelming in each. I thought they should have lost the Notre Dame game, but they didn't, and they scheduled it.
Right.
And I've said this for years. I can have a bone to pick with this coach and that coach, but when I saw Georgia play Notre Dame home and away, total respect. Tennessee for years has taken some of those big games. Nick Saban's been willing to take a few, although I wish they weren't always on a neutral field or in Dallas, which is not a neutral field for Bama. But nonetheless, I think at this point in my life, if you're willing to go out and play a big boy college football game, even if you're ugly, you win. And in college football, to win on the road, Notre Dame's a quality team. So I think Georgia would beat Ohio State. I think Michigan would. I think Washington and Oregon would. Florida State, I'm hit and miss on. They haven't played anybody. I think Texas would. I don't think Ohio State's a very good team. But they're undefeated. 2 nice wins, albeit ugly. I'm for it.
Well, they're one of several teams that have, and we'll get through the top 6 in a moment, but LSU, to an extent, rewarded the highest ranked 2-loss team. They were willing to play Florida State on a neutral site in Orlando. Utah playing Florida in a home. They won the game. They're rewarded. They sit there in the top 18. So I do think there is value to play. Even Tulane, a good example. If we're going to get to the G5, they played Ole Miss. Yeah, they have a loss, but guess what? They're ahead of Air Force, who's played nobody. So I agree with you, and I think that's a good indicator of where we might be heading down the road, where seeding really might matter because it'll determine who will get a home playoff game in the first round.
Yeah, I think so. I've seen Oregon play twice in person. I think Oregon at 6 is probably the most underrated team on this list. I think Alabama's kind of figured out what they are at 8. They're better than 8. I think Texas will trounce Oklahoma if they play again. I think Oregon could trounce Washington if they play again. And then I think Georgia, Michigan, and Texas are the most physically impressive teams. I don't think this is one of the more impressive Alabama teams. I just think it took them a while to figure out what they were. I think they have figured out what they are. And so now I think Bama at 8 is now undervalued. Texas at 7 is undervalued. Oregon at 6 is undervalued. Washington is the most fun team to watch because, they have 3 NFL receivers. Now they're getting 2 guys healthy who will probably also play on Sundays. So that's how they beat Oregon. Oregon just couldn't stop their receivers, and they have NFL offensive linemen. So I think it's all going to play out. One of the things I like about pro football is you're allowed to lose early. You're allowed to improve. That's why the 12-team playoff, which I was against years ago. I used to always argue, tell me a team at 8 who should play for the title. You know what? Look at the World Series. Look who's in it. Look at the NFL playoffs. 1 seeds lose all the time. Cincinnati went road, ends up almost winning the Super Bowl. So I like the idea of, you got the transfer portal now, Greg. You stink in September. Alabama, I watched them a couple games. I thought that they're awful offensively. Well, now they're not. So I like a sport that you are allowed to grow. And I think if Bama keeps winning and Oregon keeps winning, they're going to end up potentially in the playoff.
Yeah, I think it's in all like let's start with Oregon, because I think that they're a really interesting discussion today because there's so much recency bias, right? Well, all of us respect Utah. If you don't respect Utah, you haven't watched college football for the last 15, 20 years. They're real. Right. And Whittingham and Urban Meyer before him, they did an amazing job in building up a consistent winner. But I think all of us are being prisoners of the moment when assessing what Oregon's capable of. And I also think, too, Colin, and we need to be really careful of this because we do it every year. And it drives me insane. We give teams credit for close losses. Right. Oregon is getting credit for losing close to Washington. And I understand that. I get it. And I think that game, there's 1,000 times they play it. I think Oregon probably wins 750. They probably pick up one of those 4th down conversions. They probably don't let a drive that goes 52 yards in 26 seconds. They probably hit a field goal to tie it and send it to overtime. So, I think you could make a case that they are the better team, but I don't want to prop up Oregon as a result of a close loss. Their second best win is against a 4-4 Colorado. And that to me is just not good enough.
Yeah. I mean, so I was at the Oregon-Washington game, and my takeaway was Oregon was the better team. I don't know how many teams would have won in Seattle that day. It's a really loud, raucous place. So I don't think Oregon's getting too propped up. Washington at 5 is ahead of them. But I do think Washington has struggled with Arizona schools, and it's the way Washington's winning. They can't stop anybody. So when I watched Oregon beat Utah, some of it was Utah had just beaten the SC Trojans, and that's a big win out west. So they were in flat. In fact, I thought Oregon -6 was the bet of the day in college football, and I had said that.
But why did you tell me that beforehand? I would have liked to have had that information beforehand.
It was my DraftKings Twitter bet of the week. So, but I think what Oregon is this year, they don't make mistakes. They had their first fumble. There's not a lot of penalties. Bo Nix is the most improved quarterback I think I've seen in a decade. I didn't even like him at Auburn. Some of that was bad coaching. Lanning's been a home run coach. They recruit. They're the best recruiters, Denver West. It's not USC. It's Oregon. Yeah, they got another 5-star edge rusher 2 days ago. So when I watched Oregon, I sat in the third row for this game. I was end zone and 40-yard line in Seattle. They look like an SEC team. They're big up front. They're NFL guys, NFL quarterback, very twitchy, quick on the perimeter. So I think Oregon, one spot below Washington, is fair. But I think if they played again, and I think Washington knows this, they'd be in trouble. They would really be in trouble at a neutral field. I think Oregon would win convincingly. So I think I don't have a problem where Oregon is. The only team I struggle with in all of this is Florida State at 4, and they haven't played anybody, so I have no context for how good they are. They've got some really good NFL players. They got a couple of first-round guys. But I mean, Michigan at 3 hasn't played anybody, but they're just annihilating everybody. Yeah. I mean, Ohio State 1, Georgia 2, Michigan 3. I don't care what order you put them in. It's not going to matter. I said today, I believe the 4 best teams I've seen are Georgia, Michigan, Texas, and Oregon in terms of size, talent. Now, Texas is now on a backup quarterback, and they play Kansas State this weekend. They could be derailed. I think if they get Quinn Ewers back, they're a really good team. I think they'll punish Oklahoma the second time. But we got a long way to go, and nothing bothered me about any of these rankings.
Yeah, and let's for a moment discuss Florida State. And I have their resume here, looking at it. I think the win against LSU has gotten stronger over time. Will it continue to hold up? I would assume so. I think LSU's real. 9-3 team, probably. Maybe they drop another one. It wouldn't totally surprise me. Maybe they beat Alabama and represent the West in the SEC. I think that's possible. You have a good win against Duke that's weakening. Yeah. And you have an okay win against Boston College that you played to their level on. So I kind of agree with you. My thing about Florida State is that when they're on, and believe me, it's hit or it might be series to series.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Right. But when they're on, I'm not going to call them Washington because that's the scariest team when they're clicking to see on the other sideline, but they're dang close. Yes. And they got some guys that can close the game with their pass rush, and they have some high-end capable weapons down the field. And I think their quarterback's mature and has played a lot of football. So I love Florida State. I still think they need to go undefeated to get to the college football playoff, which is really sad because I really like the ACC this year too, Colin.
Yeah. What I'm excited about in college football is, and I've said this before, baseball and college football, Greg McElroy, by the way, if you're listening to the Colin Cowherd podcast, ESPN just watched them tonight, WJOX in Bama, alum Alabama, does a great job on the air, really knows what he's doing, very popular morning show, the morning show of note in the South. One of the things college football and baseball have older fan bases, and they tend to push back on change. NIL is going to ruin the sport. The transfer portal is going to ruin the sport.
It's just the sport's never been a more unhealthy right now, and yet we have unbelievable ratings. But I digress. Go ahead. I agree with you.
And I think it's going to explode next year. And I tell my Pac-10 fans and brethren, guys, Washington State or UCLA, that was getting nobody outside of Pullman and barely anybody in LA to a TV set. We are going to get so many quality games. I mean, Michigan against Washington, Oregon, Penn State, USC against Wisconsin, Nebraska, Michigan. I think the sport is next year is the start of almost, Greg, a new sport. Baseball made tweaks to the pitch clock and the defensive shift, but they didn't really fundamentally change the game. They chopped some time off it. Fundamentally next year, I think you're going to see going forward, teams schedule bigger out-of-conference games, not afraid to lose. You're going to see more. I've always thought college football has one issue, not enough great games.
Yeah.
In every Sunday in that early window, there's 3 down to the wire finishes minimum. It's crazy. In college football, you may get 2 games a weekend between really competent teams that are great because everybody's afraid to schedule anybody. I think next year is the beginning of almost a different version of college football. I think the Pac-12 folding into the Big Ten, the top teams, is fantastic for the sport, although initially we blanch, we push back because college football fans love history, and so do I, and the regionalization of the sport. But I think we're in a great spot, and I look at this top 10. Can you imagine if these teams were playing each other and I could get Bama and Florida State and Michigan and Texas? I mean, God, Greg, this is fantastic.
Well, I tweeted actually just a moment ago before we got linked up, and it's been posted for 13 minutes. And it has thousands of views already. And all it is the picture of the 12-team playoff for next year. And you have Tulane at Michigan. You have Oklahoma at Alabama, Penn State at Oregon, and Ole Miss at Texas. And then in the next round, Washington has a bye. Ohio State hosts the winner of Bama, Oklahoma. Florida State hosts the winner of Penn State, Oregon. Georgia hosts the winner of Texas, Ole Miss. First 2 teams left out are Missouri and Louisville, and you can already hear the griping about, well, we're not big brands, we're getting penalized. I can already hear that, and the format's not even finalized. But you have 5 Big Ten teams, 5 SEC teams, an ACC school in Florida State, and Tulane. It's going to be absurd, and I want to embrace the current format because that's where our feet are. But I can't disagree with you at all when thinking about what's coming and some of the matchups that'll be created in the postseason.
All right, NBA fans, basketball is officially back, and the DraftKings Sportsbook, official sports betting partner of the NBA, is celebrating with an unbeatable offer. New customers can get $200 instantly in bonus bets by throwing down just $5 on the NBA. That is a good deal. Win or lose, doesn't matter. You'll start the season with an instant W, a win. All right, DraftKings parlays, everybody's got a shot to even more basketball wins and bigger basketball wins. String together multiple bets. It's called a parlay, same game parlay. Build your parlay across multiple games. And what does that give you? Better odds, so you can make a smaller bet and win more money. I like doing them. I like parlays. They're fun. Basketball is more fun when you're in on the action. And with DraftKings, you will be. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app right now. Use the code Colin, COLIN. This NBA season, $10, $5. It's fun. It's juice. I love it. New customers, $200 instantly in bonus bets by betting just $5. Yeah, you heard it right. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook. The code is Colin, COLIN. The crown is yours. For a limited time, Verizon customers can get Netflix and NFL Plus for just $25 a month. It's called Plus Play. That's $120 in annual savings. Plus Play is a platform where Verizon customers can shop, manage, and save on the subscriptions that you already love, right? Like Netflix and NFL Plus. With NFL Plus Premium, you get access to live games on mobile, my fave, NFL Red Zone, NFL Network, and more. Just go to Verizon.com/plusplay. Verizon.com/plusplay to save on Netflix and NFL Plus today for a limited time only now. Limited time only. Let me ask you about Nick Saban. Kirby Smart now feels like the coach of record. Lane Kiffin, not surprisingly, has made Ole Miss really fun to watch. I think people think the kid at Tennessee is really talented. I think there's a clear unseating of Bama as the number one program. As a defensive coach, he hit on several offensive coordinators. He's got to miss on one of them eventually because he hit on, it was McElwain or Nussmeier and Kiffin and Sark and Bill O'Brien. He's hit on most of these guys. Does it feel like to you for the first time that Nick is now, you can see the age, there is a bit of disconnect with offense, or do you think it's a hiccup?
I think it's more about, I'll answer your question by asking you a question. What's the difference between Penn State and Ohio State right now? Because I think it's one player.
Penn State's got a better young quarterback.
Well, I don't disagree with that necessarily. But as far as being asked to win the game, both quarterbacks have a comparable load share. Ohio State has Marvin Harrison, and Penn State doesn't. And I think right now what Bama's going through is a 6-year run of having incomparable talent at wide receiver. And we think about the NFL. What was Tua Tagovailoa and the Miami Dolphins before Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle?
Struggling.
What was average, right? I mean, average is the day is long. What were the Cincinnati Bengals? And I know Joe Burrow tore his knee 6 games into the season, 7 games into the season, but what were they before Jamar Chase? There's frankly, if we watch the Chiefs right now, I don't see the game-breaking wide receiver. And Mahomes, while he doesn't look human, he doesn't look like a superhero at times like he has in the past. So I think the world's changed beneath our feet in the NFL and in college, that if you don't have a take over the game wide receiver, you become very human very quickly. And right now, I think that's what Bama has struggled with. Now, Jermaine Burton has been good at times. The A&M game stands out. Jalen Milroe, a good deep ball thrower, but he struggles on the intermediate and the underneath. And when you are all boom and bust, it's hard to put together a methodical and rhythmic offense. So I don't think it's necessarily Tommy Rees's fault. I just think the personnel that Alabama is relying on right now is different than what they've experienced the last handful of years. Everyone at Clemson has blamed DJ Uiagalelei and Cade Klubnik, but if you look outside, with all due respect to Bo Collins and Brandon Spector, they're not Mike Williams. They're not, Nuke Hopkins. They're not the guys that they've had in the past. So I think it's just the personnel is coming back to earth just a hair this year, but in a portal era, you can improve that overnight with the addition of a guy or two in the offseason.
Yeah. Listen, I'm out in California, and Chip Kelly has a better team than Lincoln Riley. And you think the sky is falling. And I keep telling everybody, listen, these offensive coaches, Kyle Shanahan deeply cares about defense, but some of them just don't care about defense. Kyle Shanahan does. McVay does. But Lincoln Riley, I don't know if he does. And I don't think Lane Kiffin early in his career does. Now I think he does. So it's, college football. I like all the big brands I'm getting. I think we're in a good space. I also like geographic symmetry. I think what hurt college football for about 15 years after USC and Pete Carroll is Oregon was the only consistent brand that was fun, flashy, in a top 10 program. And now that Washington, absolutely, Kalen DeBoers, they have their next Don James and Chris Peterson. He's really special. They've won 15 straight games, and they don't have elite talent. They have elite receivers and an elite quarterback. But, Greg, they don't have Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan talent. They're not even close. So I think this sport we always need a big Texas school. We need some West Coast love. It doesn't have to be USC. I think Michigan's a bigger national brand than Ohio State because Harbaugh is so polarizing. His NFL, and this is just added to it with the recruitings or with the scandal on the advanced scouting. So the whole thing, as I watched today, it put a smile on my face. I really like the top teams. I get a Big Ten team, an SEC team, an ACC team, 2 Pac-12 teams, a Texas school. It's like then Bama, Oklahoma, and Lane Kiffin. I think the sport's in good shape. I think it'll work itself out. And I'll go back to Oregon, Texas, Georgia, Michigan are the best 4 teams. If I said to you, who do you believe will end up in the playoff? 4 teams.
I think it'll be Michigan, Georgia, Florida State, and Oregon. Those are the 4 I'm going with right now. I don't love the Pac-12 I love the depth. I love the
Yes.
depth. And I look at what Washington's done the last couple of weeks. And while some people have looked at them and said, well, I mean, how do you win against Arizona State on a pick six? I mean, how can you only manufacture a handful of points offensively? And while I agree with that, it was a pitiful performance offensively. It was, and they backed it up with the game against Stanford, in which they let their quarterback go for 450. I
It
mean,
was awful.
80 on the ground, 370 through the air, or whatever the heck it was, 350 through the air. So it's a hard one to wrap your head around. So I think if they played it out over again, in a neutral site, I lean Oregon. I think they're trending in the right direction.
Yes.
I reserve the right to adjust because I think it's still inside Washington, and they're learning how to win at a high level and where the target. And I remember when I was at Alabama, the challenge that we experienced going from a team that was perennially average to all of a sudden being the grand poobah in college football, and people are now talking about you in the Heisman, and people are now talking about your team in the national championship. That was a heavy burden to take on for the first time. And it all came crumbling down Nick Saban's second year there after the loss to Florida in the SEC championship game, but it all came back around the next year when we actually believed that we could do it. That was a difficult mental hurdle for us to overcome. And I think Washington's dealing with that right now.
Yeah.
And if they can get through this weekend, because this to me is the last, granted, Utah, I think Utah's human. I think they'll wear them out.
They're on their third quarterback. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to, Bryson Barnes, with all due respect, he's going to come back to becoming a pumpkin at some point, from being the Cinderella that he was. And that's not a disrespectful thing. He's just going to have some ups and downs. But I think if Washington can get through this one, they're going to be in great shape.
Yeah.
And this one against SC this weekend to me is extremely difficult because everyone's saying SC is dead. Everyone's saying SC can't play. Their defense can't defend. I think SC still has a lot of talent. And when you're on the road and you're backed into a corner and everyone's ripping you to shreds and you're only a 3-point dog, something's telling me something. So I think this is the one that they need to be very careful with.
Yeah. It's going to be a shootout because Washington doesn't put consistent pressure on the quarterback. It's in spurts, and USC does not have elite corners, and those are Sunday receivers for Washington. So it feels 44-34 to be Huskies, but listen, it's almost like USC's last stand.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you get to a point now where this feels like the season because they're not beating UCLA. They're not. And UCLA right now is a much better team defensively. And frankly, there's a spirit about UCLA that people out West, it's like nobody wants to play them. Because there's no expectations.
They're brutal to play against, man. That D-line is ridiculous.
They got two big time player, one lottery defensive end.
Latu, 15 for those that haven't watched him. That dude is like a tarantula. Like he could stand at the linebacker level and sack your quarterback. That's how long he is. He's unbelievable. He's unbelievable.
Greg, good stuff. Ohio State, Georgia, Michigan, Florida State in the first poll. Don't have a huge problem with it. I'm just happy we got some West Coast representative and some geographic symmetry. It makes me feel good. It's been a long time.